Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Hagen Klaus, Assistant Professor of Anthropology here at Utah Valley University. And today it's my distinct pleasure to welcome to our campus Izumi Shimada for his lecture, Discovering Sicán. Born in Kyoto, Japan, Dr. Shimada attended Cornell University as an undergraduate, where he was first interested in the study of psychology. But exposure to archaeology and the prehistory of ancient South America by the renowned scholar John Murrah led Dr. Shimada down a different path. As a graduate student at the University of Arizona, Dr. Shimada joined the Royal Ontario Museum's Lambayeque Valley Archaeology project on the north coast of Peru from 1974 to 1975. His fieldwork at the ancient desert city of Pampa Grande was the basis for his 1976 dissertation that provided the first in-depth scientific studies of ancient urbanism, economics, and social organization of the first millennium AD Moche culture. However, a massive pyramid complex not far from Pampa Grande drew Dr. Shimada's increasing attention. Yet these ruins were shrouded inside the Pomac forest and also obscured by decades of scientific neglect. So, in 1978, Dr. Shimada founded the Sicán Archaeological Project to better understand this post-Moche culture. Today, the Sicán Archaeological Project continues as the longest-running and arguably most successful scientific research endeavor in the history of Andean archaeology. But the project is also distinguished not only for what it has found, but how it's been done, the holistic, interdisciplinary, and collaborative manner in which Dr. Shimada and his team have come to reconstruct and understand the Sicán over the last 30 years. Dr. Shimada has taught at Princeton, Harvard, and now is a distinguished professor of anthropology at Southern Illinois University, where I was his graduate student now 11 years ago. He is the author, editor, or co-editor of 13 books, including Pampa Grande and the Mochica Culture, and the upcoming volume, Behind the Golden Mask, Sicán Culture. He is author or co-author of 164 scholarly journal articles. I had to read all of them when I was his graduate student. 164 journal articles, book chapters, and papers, organized several world-class museum exhibits in Peru, and Japan, France, and Switzerland. This reflects the fact that he's committed not only to the scientific research, but to the dissemination and sharing the results of that research with the public. And in 2001, Dr. Shimada conceived of, designed, and created the National Sicán Museum in Peru. He is the recipient of dozens of highly distinguished and professional awards that include the Medal of Honor of the Congress of the Republic of Peru at the level of Gran Oficial, awarded to him in 2006. Now embarking on the third and final and culminating phase of his career, Dr. Shimada still helms the Sicán Archaeological Project, but also concurrently directs the Pachacamac Archaeological Project at the preeminent religious center of ancient Peru. So please, without any further ado, join me in welcoming Izumi Shimada.
Thank you for your introduction, Hagen, and good afternoon to all of you. Before I begin my lecture, I would like to take a moment to express my sincere gratitude to Dr. Hagen Klaus and Dean David Yales of College of Humanities and Social Science for their kind invitation to give this lecture. As you already know, Hagen is a star alumnus of a graduate program at Southern Illinois University, where I taught for the past 15 years. I have watched him over the past decade, rapidly establishing himself, in my estimation, as one of the most productive and promising young physical anthropologists working in Latin America. You are very fortunate to have him here. It is a genuine honor and a pleasure to be able to share with you my love of archaeology and some of the highlights of my 3 decades of archaeological research in Peru. Today I will speak about major findings to date resulting from our ongoing interdisciplinary investigation of complex mortuary practices of pre-Hispanic culture that I call Sicán, that flourished some 1,000 years ago on the north coast of Peru. The study that began in 1990 has brought to bear complementary perspectives and methods in diverse fields for the purpose of reconstructing social organization and religion of this culture. A few decades ago, archaeologists debated whether archaeology is or should be a humanistic, social scientific, or scientific endeavor. As one would expect, the debate did not have a clear resolution. In reality, archaeology is a nexus of all these three complementary endeavors. This afternoon, I will illustrate how various scientific approaches help us elucidate and understand the social organization of the Sicán culture. Now, please do keep in mind that the indigenous South Americans did not possess writing as we know it today, so that we cannot rely on their own written accounts. So that what I will be presenting is largely based or almost exclusively based on information derived from archaeology and its allied fields. First, let me briefly situate Sicán culture within the ancient Andean civilization. The Sicán was one of a succession of advanced indigenous cultures, such as those that are illustrated in this PowerPoint, that developed on the north coast of Peru. Together, they formed one of the two major ancient cultural traditions of Peru. The other tradition that culminated with the Inca Empire was centered farther south on the high plateau region around Lake Titicaca near the Peru, Bolivia, Chile borders. These two traditions together constituted one of the great ancient civilizations of the world, along with those of Egypt, Near East, Indus, China, and Mesoamerica. The name Sicán refers to the prominent pre-Hispanic culture that emerged in the Lambayeque region, that's shown there, sometime in the 9th century. The 600-year-long Sicán chronology is divided into early, middle, and late periods. In this talk, I will be discussing the middle Sicán period, roughly AD 900 to 1100, the era of its cultural fluorescence. It is becoming clear that the Sicán at its height had a multi-ethnic population that was socially stratified and governed by a series of powerful elite lineages that variously allied and competed for supremacy. Its capital, at the site of Sicán, with a dozen monumental adobe mounds, was situated in what is today the National Historical Sanctuary of Poma. That designation, National Historical Sanctuary, is essentially equivalent of National Park Services or national parks in the United States. But anyway, the Sanctuary of Poma in central La Leche Valley. Adobe, by the way, are the sun-dried mud bricks. Watered by some of the largest and longest irrigation canals of Aboriginal New World, the 350 kilometers of arid but fertile coastal plain that the Sicán controlled was one of the two major breadbaskets of the Andes. At its pinnacle, the Sicán territory subsumed over 1/3 of the estimated total land under cultivation and an estimated population of 1 to 1.5 million along the Peruvian coast. Along with a long-distance trade network of unprecedented extent in exotic and prestige items, such as the ones that I illustrated here, construction of numerous monumental adobe platform mounds, and a unique art style closely related to their religion, the Middle Sicán culture was distinguished by their sophisticated technologies. Sicán potters succeeded in large-scale production of highly polished, true black pottery, as I think you can see a good example right here. Sicán metallurgists produce alloys of arsenic and copper. Yes, arsenic and copper. Very similar to, the product is very similar to tin and copper, what we today normally call bronze. The copper and arsenic also produce essentially the same kind of bronze. And to get, along with arsenic and copper or type of bronze, and gold alloys on a scale heretofore unseen in the pre-Hispanic New World. In fact, the Sicán brought the Bronze Age to northern Peru with its arsenical bronze, permanently replacing pure copper as the utilitarian metal. The economic wealth, political clout, and the religious prestige of the Middle Sicán culture were unrivaled in Peru for its period roughly 1,000 years ago. In 1978, I initiated the Sicán Archaeological Project with a long-term research aim of gaining a holistic vision of this little-known culture. We aim to define its history and environmental setting, as well as developmental processes, internal organization, and major material and ideological features. At that time, Sicán culture was poorly known and understood, and even its heartland region of Lambayeque was perceived as culturally marginal to better-known area to the south. Indeed, it was a very curious juxtaposition to see images of a gold ceremonial tumi knife and a mask observed throughout Peru and even outside of Peru as the symbol of the nation's products and institutions, but finding hardly anyone who knew what culture made them or how old they were. Last year, as the first of their new numismatic series called Wealth and Pride of Peru, they minted this coin that the coin that bearing an image of a ceremonial gold tumi knife. Today, we now know we know definitely that they are the product of the Middle Sicán culture. But if they were the pride of Peru, why is it that the culture was so poorly known until recently? A curious contradiction. To explain it, we have to travel backward in time to the first half of the 20th century, when what is today the National Historical Sanctuary of Poma was an extensive landed estate of one outreach hacienda. Over a span of nearly 40 years, beginning in the early 1930s, the owners of this estate had engaged in intensive, organized grave looting using dozens of their peasants and even at times heavy earth-moving equipment. If you take a time to count the holes, you'll find that there is at least 1,000 of them. Personally, I counted some 100,000 looters' pits in Poma and the surrounding area. One pit measuring 54 meters wide and at least 15 meters deep had been hand dug by looters below a small temple mound. It was grave looting of an unprecedented scale that yielded hundreds of precious metal objects. When local people informed me in 1978 that, quote, tons, unquote, of metal objects had been taken out of thousands of looted tombs, frankly, I did not believe them. I came to realize that many of these objects looted in Poma were acquired by leading museums in Peru, the US, Europe, in Japan, and so on. Here is a looted mask that was being auctioned online just a few weeks ago. Okay. So the effect of looting does continue to this day. No wonder the Poma area was long described as a mecca for grave looting. Clearly, the horrific scale of looting acted to discourage any long-term investigation of Poma area, and so did the landowner who carried the weapons around. Even local police are said to have been pressured to turn blind eye. Fortunately, with the land reform instituted by a leftist military government in 1968, these owners were forced to leave this area, ending much of the large-scale destructive looting. Rather than feeling only depressed by the havoc created by large-scale looting, I felt galvanized to learn that the looter had continued with this illicit activity from the time of aforementioned land reform in 1968. It meant there was still plenty to discover and study. So it was glass half full, in a sense. Given the preceding observations regarding the archaeological remains and the productive capacities of the Sicán heartland of the Lambayeque region, I wondered why this area had not received more attention from Peruvian and foreign archaeologists, and in fact was considered culturally marginal. Considering the magnitude and the complexity of what I observed here, I originally intended to dedicate 15 years of my professional life to an in-depth archaeological investigation to gain a holistic understanding of the Sicán culture. Just imagine yourself, I was about 28 or something. For me, 15 years was like awful long time. And I thought that was sufficient. Stupid me. Little did I know how ambitious that goal was. I continued the effort to this day, 33 years later. At times, I wondered if I had made a right decision studying the pre-Hispanic cultural heritage of the area. Whatever the reason for the limited archaeological attention, I believe that the past 3 decades of our research has transformed the general perception of the area from that of a marginal importance to a center of important independent cultural developments that influenced much of the Peruvian coast and left long-lasting legacies into the Spanish colonial times. Before I focus on our research on the Sicán mortuary practices, let me briefly describe the basic research approach of our project. Our long-term research required sustained regional study, examining diverse settlements of different character, size, and location within the broad Lambayeque region. Additionally, to properly investigate the wide range of cultural and natural phenomena in this undertaking, I was convinced that I needed to adopt an interdisciplinary approach, one in which a team of specialists work closely in many, if not all, phases of research, both in and out of field. I recognize that the more commonly implemented multidisciplinary approach, in which allied specialists are brought in to analyze already excavated material, misses the opportunity for the dynamic exchange of idea and data, the creative synergy, if you will, that occurs with an active participation in all phases of research. For its entire period of its existence, our project has been committed to this interdisciplinary approach, and much of the information to be presented in this lecture was generated through collaborative research. So Hagen was one of these member of interdisciplinary team. And certainly, oftentimes, you have to sort of dine and wine these specialists so that they are willing to come and Sometimes, like Hagen, you couldn't just sort of kick them out. But anyway, it takes a lot of diplomatic kind of sort of interpersonal, let's say, skill, to assemble a team like this. By 1989, our project had clarified the chronology, environment, subsistence, and technology of the Sicán culture, and in 1990, project turned its effort toward clarification of Sicán social organization and religion. But how can we reconstruct intangible social organization of an ancient non-Western culture that never developed writing? Of the various avenues open to us for this end, we approached it by means of a comprehensive interdisciplinary analysis of burials and associated grave offerings and ritual practices, complemented by analysis of artistic representations. Now, the humans are unique in that they habitually and intentionally dispose of their dead, typically with rituals and offerings. Happily for the archaeologist, careful burial often results in preservation of not only the body, or at least the skeleton, but also of material offerings and even the physical remains of associated ritual activities. In other words, burials and related material remains represents a means by which archaeologists can learn much, and in fact, a great deal, about biological and social histories of the dead, as well as about the broader culture, population, and environment. At the same time, we need to remember that the treatment of the dead and associated ritual are largely influenced by the sentiment, values, and other concerns and interests of the living, thereby making it difficult to draw a simple correlation between material aspects and the social importance of the deceased. Artistic representation of Sicán social reality by Sicán artists, however, strongly suggests that Middle Sicán society was hierarchically organized and that the differences in social status were expressed in readily recognizable manners and forms, such as you can see here, compare those litter bearer and the personage that's sitting on top, recognizable differences in clothing and personal ornaments. By extension, I felt that the observable material aspect of burial treatment could be used as a reliable proxy for the social importance held by the deceased. Scientific analysis of skeletons provided additional pertinent lines of evidence for our study. For example, health status and diet during life, as well as kinship relationship among the deceased, were determined from varied analysis of bones and teeth. And once again, this is where Hagen was able to contribute to our project. Securing a representative burial sample has been another important consideration for our study. A distorted picture can readily result if the sample does not accurately represent the entire social spectrum of prehistoric population under study. Excavated burial can easily over or underrepresent certain social segments. For example, grave looting selectively destroys elite tombs with valuable goods, quote unquote, and archaeologists rarely has the opportunity or resources to excavate intact elite tombs. With these caveats in mind and knowledge gained from our prior systematic study of grave looting in Poma and associated discoveries of burials of various Sicán settlements within the broader region of Lambayeque, we began tomb excavation, systematic tomb excavation at the capital site of Sicán in 1990. Now, I have to actually tell you two more key two key factors. Two other key factors that led to the initiation of our burial excavation in 1990. Do remember that I started my project in 1978, and I had to bite my fingers from refraining from excavating tomb till that point. And one of that key factor was the lowering of the local groundwater level and a clear and a strong support. And the second factor was strong support of local people for the planned excavation. With the ground level falling to more than 15 meters below surface, we could safely excavate deep elite tombs that often reached 12 meters or more in depth. Also, after years of our effort to explain archaeology as opposed to grave looting, because local people often didn't make any distinction or didn't really know what archaeology was. But after the years of effort to explain what archaeology is and what archaeology can offer, the local people were eager to see Sicán tombs, particularly elite tombs, properly excavated and documented for the first time. Do keep in mind that in spite of the fact that the landowners excavated or destroyed many elite tombs, of course they never showed what they found, because those things were immediately sold. Or, as it happened, many of the gold objects were melted to produce gold ingot, double the size of standard ingots. In a 6-month period spanning 1991 and 1992, our team excavated a Middle Sicán elite shaft tomb on the north base of Wakaloro Temple Mound. It represented the first scientific documentation of such a tomb. This tomb is called East Tomb in my talk. The East Tomb was a 3 meter by 3 meter square, 12 meter deep vertical shaft with a burial chamber at the very bottom. Chamber had a roof supported by wooden beams and 7 niches in the 4 walls. It contained 5 individuals, a mature adult male, 2 young adult women, and 2 juvenile. First to appear in our excavation was a juvenile, probably a girl, 12 to 13 years of age, seated atop a detached litter seat, meaning right here. This is the girl I'm talking about. All adults were found on the floor below. The chamber contained roughly 1.2 tons of diverse grave goods, over 2/3 of which, by weight, were objects of bronze, tumbaga, that is, say, low-carat gold, silver, and copper alloys, and high-carat gold alloys, anything that's well over 12 carats. Grave goods had been arranged concentrically in superimposed layers on, around, and beneath the inverted body of a robust male personage. This is a male personage of about 40 to 50 years of age. This individual had been placed at the center atop a large rectangular mantle with nearly 2,000 gold foil squares sewn on. He was buried wearing and surrounded by gold ornaments. A gold tommy knife was placed next to his left hand, a pair of gold shin cover, next to his crossed legs, a hinged gold back flap, that is, say, something that covers your back right here, and a superimposed amber, amethyst, shelled, and other bead pectoral on the chest, literally 10 centimeters thick. His head had been detached and rotated so as to be right side up and placed in front of the body looking west. You can see right here. A large 14-karat gold mask covered his face. Additionally, he wore a nose clip and 2 pairs of large ear ornaments. You can see the ornament, ear spool right here. It's 10 centimeters in diameter and 18 karat in gold, weigh about 100 grams. So when you put through enlarged hole in your earlobe, it will have quite a weight to carry around. Placed farther away from the body of the central personage were a number of impressive items, including tall standard, believed to have been displayed in a processions, right here, and a pair of 90 centimeter long glove, almost a meter long glove. Also found on the floor were 6 pairs of 18 karat gold ear spools that display complex, innovative design and mastery of a number of difficult techniques, such as granulation and filigree made out of hand-forged wires. There is pieces, by the way, that would match any gold pieces of Etruscans and Egyptian. And since we worked with what many people consider the most skilled goldsmith of the world, Joanne Griffin, 2-time De Vere international competition winners, she said she will have a difficulty replicating them. Perhaps most responsible for creating the impression this tomb was a treasure trove was a chest containing at least 24 superimposed layers of over 60 large ornaments and ritual paraphernalia, such as rattles, crowns, headbands, and crown ornaments, all masterfully formed of thin sheets of precious metals. These precious head ornaments and ritual paraphernalia were most likely used in life by the principal personage and 2 accompanying women. Though these individuals wore various gold ornaments, none was buried wearing head ornaments. However, the crowns and headbands had different circumferences, which approximated the size of their skulls and showed use-related damages. Now, you can see we were excavating many, many gold objects, and certainly this was a time of political violence. You may have heard of the terrorist group called Shining Path, Tupac Amaru Revolutionary Army. Those 2 groups were operating daily in and around our research area. So the president of Peru at that time was Ingeniero Alberto Fujimori, assigned to me a personal guard, a captain of police carrying a bunch of guns in his body, to shadow me everywhere I go. Made it my life very difficult. And besides, I didn't know I had to pay everything of his food and everything else. I thought it was the service instead. And here is the rather stern-looking national police member, who was one of the 4 individuals who guarded our excavation on 24-hour basis. And one day, at the lunch break, I came up out of the hall, and there I found my 5-year-old son with a huge grin in his face because he had this submachine gun that one of the policemen handed to him. He was holding like this. He was having great time, showing around. And my wife was freaking out. And I was trying to be calm and said to the policeman that, I don't think it's a good idea. And the policeman calmly said to me, Doctor, no se preocupe, or don't worry. It doesn't have any bullets inside. And I said, oh, that's good to hear. And then he turned around and looked at me. By the way, we never have bullets in our guns. And then it suddenly occurred to me, huh? You're supposed to be guarding and you don't have bullets in your guns? And in fact, next day I had to go to the town to buy bullets. Anyway, that's the sort of thing that never appear in the publications. Well, anyway, joking aside, the artistic and technical quality of gold objects, as well as their overall quantity, are quite remarkable. It's insured for $1.5 million, the whole collection. At the same time, from the point of view of insight into Sicán elite and their culture, item that received less public attention has been the most informative. And let me explain this important point using a couple of examples. The power of Sicán elite may be gauged by control they exercise over material resources and manpower. Overall quantity and diversity of grave goods found with him alone is impressive enough. However, when one realizes that most of goods were produced with imported raw materials using labor-intensive primitive technology, it is indeed extraordinary. The manufactures of tens of thousands or some 80 kilogram of shells and semi-precious stone beads amounts to staggering labor investment. That's about 173 pounds, by the way. And many of our things like amethyst, quartz, amber, and turquoise. So they are very difficult to drill, not to mention polishing and so on. Probably the largest amount of manpower is represented by some half a ton or 500 kilogram of scrap metals, resulting from the production of precious metal objects. The scrap was essentially small, paper thin, literally paper thin, 0.1 to even as thin as 0.03 millimeter in thickness, okay? Pieces that resulted from the cutting, filing, and other steps of working with precious metal sheets. Also included were manufacturing rejects. It is typical that for any successfully completed object, there was a considerable quantity of scrap generated. Thus, in these heaps, we found gold foil square with holes too poorly placed for sewing, partially used ingots, and even bent and broken tools. But the average composition of scrap is roughly 13% gold, 30% silver, and 57% copper, implying that the scrap taken as a whole may hold as much as 65 kilogram of gold and 150 kilogram of silver. What is important is not the total weight of precious metal, but what the scrap tells us about the technology and the organization of metalworking and the tremendous manpower it represented. And let me elaborate on that point. A replicative experiment by renowned goldsmith, the person I mentioned earlier, Joanne Griffin, gives a glimpse of the magnitude of labor investment. Working with heavy and dense magnetite hammers that she and I had prepared, okay, this anvil as well as hammerstone that she's using. She found that it took about a day and a half to produce uniformly thin, approaching 0.1 millimeter, 10 by 15 centimeter gold sheet, 30 gram in weight, but it's a pure gold, 24 karat gold, through repetition of forging and annealing. The documented quantity of precious metal scrap that I've already mentioned would translate literally into tens of thousands of man-hours. Okay? It's really mind-boggling. However, much more valuable for our mortuary analysis, and thus for our social reconstruction, was excavation of what we call the West Tomb of Wakaloro Temple Mound. To test the hypothesis that the East Tomb that you just saw was a part of a planned elite cemetery under and around Wakaloro Mound, we have conducted ground-penetrating radar atop and around the mound various times since 1994. And we detected the West Tomb in 1994 and excavated it during a 7-month period spanning 1995 and 1996. West Tomb was symmetrically situated from the East Tomb across the north-south longitudinal axis of Wakaloro. And the West Tomb was physically imposing with a complex 2-tier nested construction, literally a tomb within a tomb. I spoke about the use of ground-penetrating radar technology to locate the tombs for excavation, and this is what you see here. That's the radar being pulled, and this is the kind of image you get. You can see the line of bright spot, and that's indeed is the vertical shaft of an unexcavated shaft tomb. And this is a sort of test excavation we did to determine if indeed this is vertical shaft of the tomb. And here's the graphic representation of the West Tomb. You can see that it is indeed tomb within a tomb, and you can see the wall niches and the pits on the what we call antechamber, and this is square area, reddish area, is the central chamber. It contained 24 individuals. A 10 by 6 meter antechamber lay 12 meters below the surface and had 10 wall niches and 12 small rectangular subfloor pits. One central niche contained 12 to 13-year-old boy, and much of the antechamber floor that you see right here included most of the 12 burial pits. Much of the antechamber floor, including most of the 12 burial pits, was covered with large painted cloth. I hope you can see them. This area like here, or on top here, okay. Painted cotton cloth. Near the northeast corner, 2 adult camelid skeletons were found. The square and rectangular subfloor pits were laid out in 2 symmetrically opposing groups of 6 each on the north and south sides of the central chamber. Each pit contained 1 or 2 skeletons, in some cases literally crammed in, of a young adult woman, mostly 18 to 22 years of age. Here you can see a couple examples. Each group referred to as the North and South woman, as you can see, the 2 groups, had a total of 9 women, each of whom was accompanied by a handful of ceramic vessels, textile, Arsenical-Copper object, and a few other grave goods. Some of these women were found to be missing 1 or more terminal phalanges, or these tiny bones in the tip of your fingers, and were accompanied by broken and incomplete ceramic vessels. In some burials, bones were disarticulated to a degree difficult to account for by natural shifting after burial. And somewhat reminiscent of a CSI program in TV, we found a small ovoid, basically lava casing, or that is the casing of muscoid flies. These were found in direct association with burials. Taken together, these lines of evidence suggest at least several bodies were either preserved in mummified forms or exhumed from earlier graves and then buried in a west tomb. At the center of the antechamber, the tomb continued down to 15 meters below surface to 3 by 3 meter central chamber with a pair of symmetrically opposing niches on the north and south walls. Okay? I'm talking about niches on the two sides. The chamber had an elaborate roof, and the east and west walls were covered with painted cotton cloth, like so. The central chambers was reserved for the principal personage and his grave goods. Personage, a robust man of roughly 40 years of age, with a serious and perhaps terminal puncture wound on his pelvis, was placed at the center of a mat-lined floor in a cross-legged seated position. He wore full regalia that included a large tumbaga mask that you can see right here, an elaborate head ornament and a pectoral of a silver alloy plate with a precious, semi-precious stone inlays. His head been thoroughly covered with very reddish cinnabar paint. A diverse range of grave goods surrounded this personage, including remains of 9 rows of narrow cloth, 2 wooden staffs, and a 4 decorated ceramic vessel completely wrapped with tumbaga metal sheets. There were also heads and articulated feet of at least 25 camelids, like the llama and alpaca, of various ages. Another major component of grave goods was at least 111 handmade crude miniature clay vessel that apparently had been made inside the central chamber shortly before it was sealed. Now, we found remains of clay mixture used for making them on the chamber floor next to many of these vessels. Most Bauer's spectroscopic analysis of these vessels revealed that they were hardly fired or not fired at all. This analytical technique, by the way, gives information on the chemical state of iron in clay, which serve as a tracer for firing temperatures and the atmosphere in which the pottery was fired. We suspect these vessels were made by funeral participants to offer a variety of food and drinks. Analysis of scraping from the interior of a similar vessels from a major tomb. Did I skip? Yes. Major tomb excavated in 2006 revealed a range of microbotanical starch grains and other food residues such as corn, unidentified tubers like potatoes, and chili peppers, suggesting that they contain a variety of beverages and food like chicha or corn beer and stew. Large quantity of miniature vessels may reflect the number of participants at the funeral. In this case, by the way, there's over 1,100 miniature vessels. While family members and close associates of the deceased might have had a privileged roles to play in the burial ceremonies, signified by placing fine ceramics and metal objects, ordinary community members may have also participated by making and placing these miniatures within the grave. The very act of preparing and depositing miniature vessel containing food and drink for the deceased leader effectively served to express the community's sentiment toward the deceased and at the same time reinforce their sense of group identity. Now, returning quickly back to the West Tomb, to gain a better idea of why women in this tomb were bipartisan, we carried out DNA analysis. This analysis of DNA in a microscopic structure called mitochondrion, found in all cells of our body, enabled us to identify kinship, but unfortunately only along the maternal lines. Analysis of mitochondrial DNA extracted from teeth of burials in the West Tomb showed that the North and the South women not only were physically separate in tomb, but were genetically and probably ethnically distinct as well. Okay, I think you can see that the color-coded burials are related, maternity-related kins. Independent support of this interpretation came from biodistance, or inherited dental trait analysis. This is a statistical analysis of inherited tooth forms that allow us to infer the relative genetic affinity, or thus distance, of individual being compared. Okay? Okay, the smaller the value, the closer you are to each other. Results of these two analyses further indicated that the principal personage and a companion elite woman in a nearby south niche of the central chamber were both biologically much closer to the south woman than the north woman. North niche woman of the central chamber without any ornaments or offerings, on the other hand, was related to two of the North women. The South women were genetically quite alike, most probably product of endogamy, which is a custom of marrying within one's own group, perhaps even marrying to your kins. The North women as a group were much more genetically dissimilar, considering that the many of them were accompanied by ceramics and textile that showed strong stylistic affinity to the earlier Moche style. We hypothesized they represented a Moche ethnic group that had been incorporated into Sicán society. In fact, various chemical and physical analysis of these Moche style ceramic associated with North women reveal that they were made at a workshop roughly 15 miles or 22 kilometers southwest of Huacaloro by potters of inferred Moche ethnicity. In contrast, the South women were accompanied by exclusively Sicán goods and were presumed to belong to an ethnic Sicán population. Now, to provide additional indication of the geographical origins and ethnic identity of women in the West Tomb, we conducted analysis of strontium, oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen isotopes extracted from tooth enamel and bones. In essence, the strontium isotopes are incorporated into our body primarily through water we drink, which in turn contains isotope derived from the regional bedrock. Thus, strontium isotope values can give us an idea of from where they came. Carbon and nitrogen isotope ratios, on the other hand, provides a general idea of diet. In fact, individuals in the West Tomb all seem to have eaten basically a similar diet consisting of a mixture of different kinds of plants, animal meats, and marine products. Strontium isotope ratio reveals some variation that suggests these individuals grew up in a relative proximity to each other. Overall, the Middle Sican society appeared to be composed of at least 2 ethnic groups occupying the same general area, but with ethnic Sicans enjoying higher social positions over the ethnic Moches, who most likely formed the majority of commoners and workforce. While the East and West tomb both hint that the social status of women was subordinate to that of men in Sican society, our 2006 excavation that you see here at the west base of the same Wakaloro temple mound that exposed 24 graves containing at least 27 individuals clearly attests to the high social standing enjoyed by some women. For example, tomb 1 that you see here, a woman of roughly 20 years of age was interred in her own 3x3 meter, 10-meter deep shaft tomb with numerous and diverse grave goods, as well as an adult female companion. 2 infants were buried at the mouth of her tomb at the time it was sealed. Further, at least 5 lesser graves containing males and females and cash offering of sumptuous goods are placed around the tomb over 50 to 100 years after following her interment, suggesting a very lasting social memory of this elite woman. So let me now turn to the concluding portion. Various lines of evidence I presented thus far indicate not only the planned nature of the cemetery at Wakaloro, but also tomb placement preceding and following the construction of Temple Mound of Wakaloro. There are still many tombs of various size present under and around the temple. Today, we consider Wakaloro Temple and its associated cemetery to be an integrated whole that served as an impressive and lasting tombstone, a commemoration of the identity, power, and importance of an elite lineages, and exclusive altar for worship of deceased ancestors and members. The presence of 5 other monumental temple mounds of varied magnitude, each associated with a large cemetery containing major shaft tomb within the Middle Sican capital, and evidence of multi-ethnic integration within a broader society suggests that the Middle Sican social and political system were by no means monolithic. I suspect there were a number of powerful elite lineages that at times allied or competed with each other, giving certain fluidity to the social organization and challenging us to capture the dynamic facets of Sican society from the static, preserved remains of their funerary practices. And I end my talk with assessment of a bit of the social significance of the 3 decades of archaeological research for modern population of the Lambaeke area. These are the images I've taken over the last several years. In one case, you can see the local and the central government officials, including the current president of Peru, Dr. Alan Garcia, and the regional governor have taken advantage of the notable discovery we have made to use it as a platform to urge regionalism or nationalism. In other words, a political usage of archaeological discovery is something that has happened many times in the past. And this is something that the archaeologists have to be aware of, that there are actually broader consequences or impact of what you discover. And therefore, that we do have a good deal of responsibility, social responsibility, to be careful about what we say and how we say of our discoveries. At the same time, you can also see the images that suggest that the didactic or educational impact of our material, our excavation. Local educators from primary to university level have incorporated archaeological knowledge that we have amassed and disseminated to highlight the cultural heritage of their students. And in a more spontaneous manner, various civic groups have adopted the name Sicán and its notable images or object as their group icons. And I'm happy to report to you there is even Discoteca Sicán. Now, the predominantly mestizo population of our study, the mixed group of Indian and Hispanic origin, that had no well-defined ethnicity or interest in discovering their ethnic origin, has gradually embraced their indigenous ethnic identity. In fact, a recent DNA analysis conducted by our project DNA specialist clearly showed that my local mestizo worker do have a strong genetic affinity to the people of the ancient Sicán society, to the people that they help us study. And I think that really made them quite proud of their own invisible heritage, in a sense. You can see this is a sort of image of the impact to people of all ages. You see, they are very happy and proud of what they created, the ornaments and the headdress and so on. They're claiming to be that they are the princess or to be a prince of the Sicán, etc. But this is the sort of thing that we came to see only in the last several years. Lastly, yep. Yeah. Oh no. Okay, well, let's see. Well, the very last image was to show you the construction of new National Museum that I think Hagen mentioned in his introduction, dedicated to study and preservation of archaeological remains of Sicán cultures. Okay. And it is the, thank you. This is the place where you can see many of the things that I illustrated during my talk. And this is still a project, ongoing project. We have still a lot to improve after this museum. But I will tell you that don't let the president of Peru or anybody of political power twist your arm to design a national museum in less than 1 month, as I was forced to do, and they didn't even pay me a cent. Anyway, no, I do think that we did a pretty good job for the money and time we had, and I do hope you learned something about the Sicán cultures, and if you have an opportunity, do please visit this National Museum of Sicán. And I thank you very much for your time and interest.
Dr. Shimada, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We do have a reception for Dr. Shimada at 1:30 in the International Center. That's in about 20 minutes. But I do believe right now we have a few minutes for some questions. Microphones will come to you.
Were you able to tell if the elites in the different tombs were related in any way?
Well, I mentioned about the use of DNA methods, and we certainly tried to establish any sort of kinship relationship. DNA analysis is a difficult one in that it all depends on whether you can actually retrieve uncontaminated, basically very good, well-preserved DNA. And that's often difficult. The recovery rate of good quality DNA material from teeth is anywhere from about 25% to about 50%. So in the case of the elite individual that we have excavated and the sample that we extracted, we haven't been able to get enough material to define the kinship relationship. And the mitochondrial DNA analysis, also keep in mind, is really only clarified maternal linkage. No, that is, you rarely ever be able to find out over 50-year, the tomb of only the modern tombs you could do that. And I think it would be very difficult to do with ancient tombs or the burials. But the biodistance study does suggest that the central personages of the East and the West tombs were most likely something in the order of cousins. Yeah, the value would suggest it's something fairly close. We can never be able to precisely state their nature relationship, but it's pretty close relationship. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Check. All right.
So
next, you go.
I've got the microphone. I actually have two questions. The first one is there can you set a timeline on the times of the various tombs, and can you correlate that to an increasing affluence or a declining affluence of the society? And the second one is there a pathology associated with the arsenates in the bronze in some of the remains?
Okay. The first question, the dating of tombs is all based on radiocarbon-14 dating technique, supplemented by the analysis of art style and something of that sort. So we have a limitation in that sense of the precisions. But nonetheless, everything indicates that we are dealing with relatively tight time frame, probably no more than a few generations. The ones that I illustrated, East and West tombs, in terms of artifact style, is undistinguishable. So they're probably fairly close. And in terms of the change in the style of the things that associated with different tombs, as I said, because of the similarity in time or closeness of time, we don't really see that much difference. We don't seem to have evolved that much. It's really once we expand the time frame to up to about 100 years, we can recognize clear differences. As for your question about the effect of arsenic, we have one individual well-preserved, and in fact, his hair were quite well-preserved. And so we did analyze segments of hair for the trace element or trace amount of arsenic inside his body. But surprisingly, we found no abnormal level. And this may be because of the way the Arsenical-Copper were smelted. In order to smelt the arsenic-copper alloys, we will need at least 980 to 1,000, slightly above 1,000 centigrade temperature of smelting temperature. And in order to achieve that kind of temperature, you need a good supply of oxygen, forced draft. And that is where I mentioned about notion of primitive technology. The Sicán people, they did not know or have the effective draft supplying mechanism. Okay? It was the human lung power through the blow tubes that the air was supplied. And if you ever tried the blow tubes, and we have the actual remains of blow tubes, and they all have 0.8 centimeter diameter, pretty small hole to force your air through. And as we have done many experimental replication of smelting technology, you realize it's very exhausting to continuously blow up to 3 hours, continuously 3 hours to blow to keep up the heat, the temperature. But that's where I think the secret is. You are basically forcing the air into the furnace and then blowing out the noxious gas that contain the arsenic and already in a volatile form away from your body. So I think the impact of arsenic is relatively limited, is the impression we have.
Hello. Thanks for coming. I have kind of an ethical question. Mm-hmm. Kind of the distinguishing between archaeologists and looters, right? I've been recently affected by a book by Craig Childs. It's called Finders Keepers, and it kind of goes into that whole debate. And his thesis, I guess, is that we have too much stuff in museums. Museums run out of funding eventually. And so it's almost like they're safer in the ground. Like, how do you respond to that? I mean, it seems like you've helped build a museum, but then does that ever kind of give you ethical qualms?
Okay. The issue, the ethical issue you raised is certainly quite real, and I did consider it, and it's one of the reasons why I actually did spend a fair amount of time talking to local people to make sure that the local people themselves support the idea of digging out the burials. Because certainly in the US, we have seen difficult situations of relationship between the Native Americans and archaeologists, and certainly that sort of consideration applies to the area where I work in Peru. And that is why it was the support, express the interest of the local people that really motivated me to actually go ahead and excavate. The other aspect is that the tremendous destruction that had already been created by the local landowner that left behind nothing other than the huge number of holes on the ground. And I think that really is one of the reasons why local people themselves wanted for us to do a proper documented excavation, and so that they themselves can see what's in their own land. So that's how I personally dealt with the ethical issues. And then secondly, yes, I did do as much as I could. Besides 1 month I spent visiting museum and drawing and basically designing the museum, the subsequent year and a half, much of my time, besides teaching, went to actually working in that museum. I did a lot of the placement of the objects, etc. And it was all free labor. We didn't get a cent. Okay? It's my way of paying back the Peruvian and Peru as a country for giving me the privilege of being able to work in Peru. And so I try to reciprocate in that sense. And then we also have in that museum, Sunday is a free day. Local people can come and see the museum free of charge. So we do try to share as much of the information as possible. So it's my personal solution or my personal approach to this whole issue, but I don't think I can actually impose my approach or my thinking to everybody. But
I think we have time for 2 more questions, please.
The question I have is that you mentioned that this civilization had no writing whatsoever, that you've been able to discover, and yet the robbers, thousands and thousands of graves were robbed. Is there any possibility that there may be eventually some writing discovered or found, or did you have any kind of inclination to investigate that possibility at all?
Well, the search for writing or anything that resemble or serve as another, well, let's say the communicative device or recording device, that continues. And in our case too, we have various kind of, let's say, the signs, markings that are used to identify perhaps the makers or owners. In other words, the abstract symbolic notational system did exist. And that's why I use the phraseology of writing as we know it. So the recording device of some sort did clearly exist. Then, in fact, in the case of the textile, many of the cultures of the ancient Peru are so elaborate and so systematic in their distribution, design, etc. It's been interpreted, and quite convincingly, as a recording of a calendar to the astronomical observations and so on. So I think there were indeed quite sophisticated recording devices. And I would also say that I think most of us forgotten the fact the whole concept of oral knowledge, oral history, the skill of remembering. I think we've lost a lot of that, particularly in these days where it's so easy to grab iPhone or whatever, the instantaneous sort of such an easy to communicate technology available, I think have really eroded our ability, really forced us to sort of forget, unfortunately, I think. And in that sense, I think when the Spaniard came, we're now talking about nearly 500 years after the Middle Sican collapse, but nonetheless, the Spaniards compiled so much of the information based on oral history and these oral specialists that accounted or recounted so much detail, suggests that the whole art of remembering, I think, existed, and even at the ordinary people level. So,
thank you.
My question's about the water table you mentioned,
Yes.
and the destruction it did in some of the tomb and grave goods. Is there any indication, can we tell whether that was from increased rainfall, a diverted river, and is there any idea that they may have anticipated that effect in their burial?
yes, that's a good question. I personally consider that possibility that those tombs were dug at the time when the just general whole area was indeed drier. In fact, the current course of river that runs nearby, in fact, today runs right next to the Wakalaro temple. And we've been struggling to preserve that temple. But anyway, that course is clearly different from the ancient course. It came much closer. So it's quite possible that the earlier water level, groundwater level, was much lower to start with. And yes, and two, that the intensive pumping or the irrigations of the up valley, I'm sure, helped in raising the water level of the area that we've been working, because it's a middle portion of the valley. Okay. So there are, I'm sure, the number of reasons that can account for the fluctuation, but it's very possible. We know that the Middle Sican, roughly from about 1020 to 1050, roughly 3 decades of relatively severe and persistent drought. So it's quite possible that it was indeed a time when the groundwater level was, generally speaking, fairly low, for them to be able to excavate down to 15 meter. And that's not necessarily the deepest tomb, by the way. There are the one that goes up to about 20 meters. So it's really a lot of work to dig down that far, because you're cutting through some of them. You have a couple meters pure clay. It's just incredibly difficult to cut through that kind of compacted clay layers. And so, I mean, they were investing many days. Okay. In fact, if I didn't emphasize this point, I should do so, that unlike today, the people after death probably weren't buried right away. It was a much longer process. And we calculated that the excavation, the West Tomb alone, would require employing about 50 persons just to get the figure. Every day, it still taking nearly two months to dig just a hole. And then they had to finish the interior, prepare the cloth to lay on top and on the floor, etc. So it's very possible that before the actual central personage body was placed, it would pass the 3-4 months. So it really was a pretty elaborate and long-term process.
Well, once again, thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you.